All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Corey Kiselevich, and I'm the Marketing Director with Concord Direct. I'll be moderating today's webinar. We're really excited to share this information with you because we know it really can transform the way you plan campaigns. We've seen it firsthand with dozens of programs, and we're excited to share it. So we're going to start with a quick overview of the presentation, and then I'll introduce the presenters and get out of the way. First, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about some trends in the nonprofit industry and how the use of data is becoming more and more widespread and how its use has become more and more sophisticated too. Then we're going to walk through a simulated campaign. So earlier this week, I sent out a link to a survey in preparation for today. Don't feel bad if you didn't get a chance to complete it. Quite a few of you did, and that was plenty of data to provide a good backdrop and context for the presentation. As we walk through the campaign, we'll show you the expected results based on the campaign decisions you guys made in the survey. Then we'll introduce a few analytical tools that'll bring to life some insights in the data that weren't that visible before. And finally, we'll introduce a little AI and machine learning to show you how you can squeeze every possible drop of revenue from your campaigns. Throughout the presentation, especially around the analysis portion, we're going to show you guys some snippets of data. And this data was all synthesized and randomly generated, so it's as realistic as possible. For the sake of the presentation, though, imagine that our data set was gathered from multiple test packages sent out and tracked. We also know that there are dozens of elements and decisions involved in any typical campaign, but just like a roadmap doesn't really show you every building and shrubbery, our simulated campaign has been kind of simplified and streamlined to make the concepts a little more obvious. So with that, let me introduce our speakers. First, providing the industry perspective on the evolution of the use of data, Concord Direct General Manager Steve Rudman. Steve has been working in direct marketing for over 30 years with clients such as American Cancer Society, the Arthritis Foundation, St. Jude, the National Wildlife Federation, and Feeding America. Please say hello, Steve.
Hey everyone.
And second, explaining the magic behind the ones and zeros is Lityx Chief Operating Officer Gary Robinson. Gary's been deeply involved in marketing analytics for over 20 years, nearly as long as the internet has been around. And Gary has held senior leadership roles in some of the most advanced analytics-driven marketing companies in the world, including Merkle and Bank of America. So Gary, please say hello to everybody. Gary, there you go.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Nice to be with you today.
So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Steve to start our presentation. Steve.
All right. Well, I get excited with data. I'm sort of a little bit of a data geek myself, and I really enjoy the opportunity to sort of understand how we can use information to effectively impact people's behaviors and ultimately drive better performance. And I'm sure in one context or another, for everyone listening, that you have had your own experience in looking and understanding at the converging trends of what's going on within the nonprofit space today, and how we have really created urgency to make greater use of data and analytics. As we all know, getting a donor in the door or keeping a donor is no easy task. And so using as much and what is available is critical in being able to accomplish that. At one level, donors are really want to quantify and understand sort of the evidence of impact, right? Because every dollar these days is being scrutinized and people want to understand how it's getting used. The benefit is that with the advances of technology, we have this opportunity to really drill down on cost and understand complexity in a way that we never have before. And so as a result, all of that leads us to the ability to really create these really unique experiences for the donor that are personalized, that are relevant to the things that they may or may not be interested in, or even just presenting them with a different type of offer. And so as we think about data, we need to think about it in a number of different dimensions. when you look at the impact and you realize that 72% of all gifts are coming from an individual contribution, you realize how significant it is to really understand that behavior. And that just demonstrates why it's so important to continue to work towards a better solution. And the notion that constituent data is your most valuable asset, I think that I would imagine is fairly evident to most people. The question becomes, what do you do with it? So as we move forward and discuss in greater detail, I think everybody would probably agree that data analytics at some level is sort of table stakes. It's required. The question is, at what level is it needed in order to accomplish what is relevant and in the right scale for your particular organization? Because data analytics is not all equal. And part of what we're going to talk about is understanding sort of what the levels of that analytical effort is, and how do you start to turn the dials and pull the levers to try and impact. As we probably, this is a quote, but it's really relevant as you think about the conversations you're probably having, and I know that we have a lot around analytics. It's really trying to understand that at the end of the day, what might have been considered advanced a few years ago is now sort of the expectation. And so there are new things that are becoming advanced, right? And I think it's trying to stay ahead of that and understand as much as you can to try and impact that performance. So what is that sort of journey on the analytic spectrum? Because it's, as I said earlier, it's not all equal. At one level, and these are statistics, these are not our numbers. This actually is coming from the IBM Institute. It's fairly significant in my opinion. 67% of nonprofits are sort of in the preliminary stages of using data analytics. And the balance, which is nearly a third, are really already in that what we call sort of advanced analytics. I think when we talk about preliminary stages and you look at this sort of spectrum, think of most organizations are doing some type of RFM segmentation, even at a basic level. And as you look at categorizing where RFM sits, that's sort of in that descriptive diagnostic area. So when you think about anything above RFM segmentation, you are really getting into some level of advanced analytics. And this is one view. So as we continue to gather more information, we continue to adjust sort of the point of view of the market. The compelling part of all this, though, is, and why, as you start to look at that spectrum and it becomes so important, is that those that are actually using advanced analytics, which you saw was about 33% or so, they're seeing 2 times improvement in their ability to actually impact results or performance, efficiency, and productivity. So it is a factual based impact on performance, and so there is clearly a value in pursuing it for on an individual basis. So what is the impact? I mean, if you look at this sort of gives you a good visual representation of those different kind of levels within the spectrum. And pretty much consistently, the big takeaway here is that the foresight, which is really the advanced area, has a bigger impact. So you're going to get less impact from ad hoc. You're going to get greater impact from sort of where the majority of the market is, which is in that sort of hindsight sort of RFM area. And you're going to really see the true impact coming when you start to look at what advances you can make to how you are better able to identify people. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary, and we're going to sort of take you through an example, a simulation of what that might look like. As Corey said, based on some input that you had provided for those that participated in the survey and some other information, I think it'll be really interesting. We'll have questions at the end, so gather them up. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Gary, we got you.
You got me. Okay, great. And you see my screen fine, and we switched over to my computer so we could go through the simulation. All right. What we're going to walk you through is, as was discussed, hopefully you'll see it as quite similar to what you're used to. Let's see here. Sorry about this, everyone. All right. Okay, great. And this data that was generated for this was taken, from similar data that we've analyzed from other nonprofits, but we wanted to keep this anonymous to any particular nonprofit. And so what we've got in this simulation are 3 audience segments, 4 message segments or types, and then 4 premium types. And so what we're going to do is show sort of the journey, as Steve called it, through those stages of analytics and demonstrate what kind of results you get from those. And I can talk a little bit about some of the steps that are taken to achieve those results. And so many of you had also replied to a survey that was sent out on these, and so we'll come to those survey results shortly. So what you're seeing is 3 audience segments of varying quantity. The audience segments are just representative of any type of audience segment that you might have. And you probably have much more than 3, but for simplicity, we kept it to 3. And you've got different response rates from these audience segments that you typically get, a different average gift amount, and ultimately, we're showing here kind of an average net revenue per name. If you're not familiar with that, it's just the net revenue that's being generated, the revenue minus the cost and dividing it by the quantity. So right off the bat, we see that audience A generally is unprofitable. On average has been unprofitable over the period of time that we're analyzing here. Whereas audience B is somewhere is profitable at 16 cents per name, and then C is the most profitable. Then we've got the 4 message types. So it's representing this idea that you've got a lot of options. Same with the premiums. You've got a lot of choices. And these things, you often have champions and challengers over time. And so I won't go through each of the 4, but suffice it to say there's sort of four different appeals here. And premiums, you're well aware of, different like address labels, the wall calendar, and you can see that they have different incremental costs associated with those. Those would be like cost per piece added on to the baseline cost per piece. So hopefully this all, is easily understandable and perhaps similar to what you're used to seeing. Let me flip the page here then. So we're going to start with just kind of a basic segmentation, and note in the top right corner, we've got an X in this sort of hindsight area, and that X will move along as we move along, where we're talking here about kind of descriptive type information. As Steve described, descriptive and diagnostic, sort of your RFM. This is very much the area of what happened. And when you're talking about descriptive, it's very much what happened. When you get into diagnostic, you start to say, well, why did it happen? And so it's kind of like a lot of reporting, is characterized in this area. So if we look at those audience segments, as we were just seeing, and this is roughly the same information, but we provide a little bit more detail here. This is before we've done any other segmentation than just looking at this by audience. And this is, as we talked over time, sort of a variety of different messages, a variety of different premiums, generating the performance you see. And so this results in an average of $66,267 in revenue. It costs $63,000. And so you end up with $3,267 in net revenue. So that's your profit out of this. So you had to invest quite a bit of money, $66,000, just to get $3,000 in profit. That's 4 cent net revenue per name. So we've noted here the key numbers, because these are what we'll track as we go through this. All right. So let's look at sort of the options that were asked of you all, for those who responded and said, if you had to make a choice, without knowing anything more than this, what might you choose to sort of target? And so, not surprisingly, folks said, well, I would of course target B and C, and I would exclude A. Maybe there's things we can do with A, but for the moment, let's just target B and C. And then when it comes to the campaign messaging, message 4, not sure exactly what reason, but was chosen as the message of most interest, and then with the wall calendar. And so we're going to play this through now and say, all right, let's see if this outperforms what we were just looking at. Naturally, you think it should, just for the sake of having eliminated audience A. And so we move up into our diagnostic, trying to understand why it happened. And so what we've done already is we've reduced our quantity, so we're at 50,000 instead of 90. We've actually increased the response rate. It was like 3.6 or something, and we've increased the average gift. So the choice to reduce the size and eliminate audience A, and potentially even go with the message 4 and wall calendar, seems to have been a good one to make. Certainly relative to net revenue, it's gone to $13,893, which is an improvement of $10,000, just over nearly $11,000. And the cost is decreased by $14,500 because we're marketing less. And this is sort of the general process that you all are making on a regular basis. You're doing some level of analysis of your campaigns, and kind of maybe moving from some existing champion to new champion, and and sort of doing the best you can, and using data to make the decision and having positive impacts. And as Steve said, again, you're operating up here kind of in this RFM area. So the question is what happens when you move into this idea of advanced analytics? And it sounds a little bit sort of mysterious if you're not familiar with it, but like all things that are, once you learn it, it's not that mysterious at all. And the ease with which you can do it now is becoming so much easier and greater. So as we move into that area, I just want to give you a quick little insight on this idea of sort of predictive segmentation. We've talked thus far about audience A, B, and C, and what we want to do is recategorize them. In this case, we're going to call them tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when one does predictive modeling, they're analyzing obviously data, as much data as is available. Steve was talking about the importance of the data you have. So certainly the gift history data is just a wealth of fantastic information, and it's being used for RFM. RFM is a strong segmentation, but it sort of minimizes some of the richness of the data by putting it into those R, F, and M buckets. They're defined buckets. The difference that might exist within a bucket is lost. Another good source of information is the promotion history information, the number of contacts, what was received, when it was received, how many times it has been received. This is not as powerful as actual behavior, the gift history, but it's still very predictive and adds a lot of value. The challenge with what I'm talking about, though, is it starts to get voluminous. You start to have a lot of information, and you potentially are not in a position to be able to analyze it as simply as you could with RFM. RFM, you go into your spreadsheet and you can look at what are still fairly complex matrices, But with the tools that we're talking about, with the different modeling tools, they're making it so much easier, faster now to apply all of these algorithms that, these terms you may have heard, where they really interrogate all of the elements of the data and figure out what's most predictive. What exact definition of recency, like what is the, instead of looking at it by months in groups, we'll look at it by days. And we'll say, I want to know number of days since last donation, and number of days since second to last donation, and number of days since third last donation, because I want to know the velocity of gift giving. Is it increasing, decreasing? Is it flat? So the idea is there's a lot of wealth in that information that it takes the next level of analytics to really flesh out. And so what happens is we will take your existing segmentation and we'll sort of rebuild it. And this is what you're going to see here. We're going to have tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And A, B, and C, they're just now within these tiers. They're sort of being moved over and redefined. So I just want you to understand this, because as we now move into this next level, you may say, well, what happened to A, B, and C? Same people. We're just recognizing some of the A's are tier 1 and some of the A's are tier 4. And some of the B's are tier 4 and 2. And you kind of have a mix, within these of this new definition. All right. So as we move into predictive now, we're down here. And predictive is saying what will happen. We've moved from what happened, why did it happen, to what will happen. And as we move up this progression, we're closing what's often called the insights to action gap. And if you haven't heard that expression, it really makes sense. I always kind of call it the so what gap, because I remember, throughout my career earlier on, especially when you would present what you thought was compelling analysis, and the senior business manager would say, so what? What am I supposed to do with this? What is this telling me to do? And so when you're at the lower levels of analysis, you have a bigger gap. You have to, if you're looking at a bunch of reports, you're asking yourself, well, what is this telling me? What's my decision? What change in action should I take? But as you move up, it becomes more self-evident. And so when you get into predictive, it's becoming much more clear what you should do. You should do what performs the best. But you'll see there's even a higher level. So within predictive now, we've got our 4 tiers. And so we're going back to our 90,000. Previously we took the 90 down to 50 because we eliminated audience A, but now we're revisiting the 90 in reference to what's currently the champion message and premium. The marketer has asked us, hey, can you analyze my campaigns and tell me who's going to be most interested in message with a wall calendar, because that's what I'm marketing right now, and I want to improve my results. And so what the model does is just that. We train it on your historical data, and we say, based on all this gift history and promo history information, maybe some demographics, tell me what are the characteristics of somebody who's most interested to least interested in giving and at a sufficiently high gift amount. And so when we do that, we get this nice rank order on net revenue per name, and ultimately net revenue. So this is what we would probably sort of model on, is ideally this net revenue per name. And now we've got sort of just this new table to think about. And just like before where we eliminated A, this is clearly suggesting I would not market tiers 3 and 4. They're underwater. Tier 1 is fantastic. That looks great. And in fact, we're really not using this time to talk a lot about contact frequency, but you might say tier 1 may be an audience that you can likely market to more often than say tier 2. And we've only broken it into 4 tiers for simplicity again. The number of tiers is really up to you, the data scientist, what have you, as volume allows for. And so when we do this, naturally you're going to say, all right, well, given this, I want to see what tier 1 and 2 provide me with results. So now I had my 90,000, and I'm scaling it back down, but not 50. I'm actually scaling down to only 45,000 because that's the sum quantity that fell into tier 1 and 2. Still message 4 wall calendar. My response rate on that is 5.6 with a $25 average gift. And now my net revenue has really climbed because I'm getting much more efficient and effective with my targeting. Now my net revenue is up to nearly 20,000, to a further improvement of $6,000 over the previous targeting. As I mail less, I'm reducing my cost, and so I've further improved my my cost reduction by another $4,850. And so my net revenue per name now is up to 44 cents. And this idea, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know of net revenue is, or ROI, is not only are you generating, more net revenue, but you're spending less money to do it. And so that's money that can be reinvested or used elsewhere. So it's great. You only have to ask for, in this case, $43,000 instead of, $60,000 to generate, in this case, even more net revenue. So you're really winning, it feels like, in both ways. So this is what a predictive sort of analysis would give you. You're asking someone to optimize what you're currently doing. But when you get into the next phase, as we'll do, the prescriptive / AI, artificial intelligence. Prescriptive is, we were talking about, how did I do? Why did I perform the way it did? Predictive is how will it perform? Let me predict. And then prescriptive is that final step. What should I do? And it's usually built off of a predictive foundation, but it's going a step further and saying, let me look at all available options. Let me put all of the options on the table. Let me build all of the models that will give me all of the predictive performance, and let me right size and line up the right offer with the right person and all that. And so the idea of the AI gets into whether it's being done in some automated, let's say machine learning, whether, there's a system in place, an infrastructure and technology, software to sort of do that for you. And there are, and these things, as we've said, keep coming down in price and are much easier now than they've ever been. And so when we do that, what we're looking at is going back to the 90,000 and now looking not at just message 4 and wall calendar, but looking at everything that you've marketed over some period of time where you've got enough of variety that you really want to see, well, I had this A, B, and C, but what if I just look at it at the individual level? What if I just try to predict who's going to be most interested in the wall calendar versus the pocket calendar versus any of the other premiums or any of the other creatives? What is the right combination for the individual? You're continuing to move this down, but again, the complexity goes up, and so your ability to do this feels more distant. But it's a matter of just finding a specialist and someone who does it. It occurred to me that in thinking about this, there's sort of medical procedures that are so routine now that I guess we viewed as being and are still fairly complex in their nature, but the technology and really also the cost allows for them to be done in a fairly sort of perfunctory way. You can just kind of knock these things out, and I would say that's what's happening with all this advanced analytics. It's been around enough, and what's changing is more of just pure machine learning and AI, but the underlying mathematics has been around for a while, and it's very sound, and so the technology is making it easier. And so these things that seem really complex are, if you're not experienced with them, but for the practitioner, they're fairly routine. And so you really should be taking advantage of the abilities that are out there and the folks who specialize in this. So with this one then, when we optimize the offer, the message, the premium to the individual, and tiered the results, Now we get even a stronger, rank ordering. If you were remembering previously, we're really getting to start to separate performance. It's as is common. Typically, the top tier and the bottom tier, really have the most divergence, and then there's sort of a gradual reduction. And so when we look at how this performs, net revenue wise, in this case now, we were able to go down to this tier 3, and typically the tiers, are meant to be of equal size. We go down to tier 3, where we're still profitable. It's only in tier 4, and given kind of the size of these tiers, as I said, we would likely break these up into even more granular tiers, so that the drop off, you don't go from 0.3 all the way to negative 0.22. That's where's the more marginal 0.10 or 0.08s and stuff like that. They're within these, but we could break this up into finer pieces. And so what you end up with, as you can see here, is this overall net revenue as we had. But now, if we were to just go after audience 1, 2, and 3, just the 3 that are profitable here, our quantity is at 67,500. And so based on, from previous, we were able to grow the net revenue even more. We're able to grow it from up to $39,930, which is a further improvement of 19,000. And the cost from where it originally was is still down. We're only looking at a cost of 39,571. This is because we have now optimized the premium. If you recall, we were using the wall calendar, and that happened to be the most expensive premium. And while it gave us a lift, it may not have given us as much sort of bang for the buck as we could have gotten with a less expensive. Maybe it gave a lift, but we could have gotten 90% of that lift with 20% of the incremental cost or such. And so by doing this sort of AI and prescriptive view of all of the options, the cost went down even further from where it was previously. And so if we look at this in aggregate, and this is definitely a sort of a intentionally generous example for illustration purposes, we were able to move the net revenue from just over $3,000 all the way up to $39,000, and the cost down from 63 to 39. And you can see through the bars here, kind of that story basically. The revenue is going up, the costs are coming down, and the net revenue is going up. This type of analysis is not, as I said, that complicated. It's not something that we're just sort of showing you this, and this never turns out this way for anybody. The cost of this is not very much, and it always more than pays for itself. It's just building on what you're already doing. You're doing a more simplistic form of this with RFM and the analysis you're doing. It's just now asking the models and the technology to interrogate the data in ways that you simply can't. And then the results are ones that you can make better decisions on. I always want to make sure that that's noted, is that this is not taking away from your role or your responsibility or your importance. It's just providing additional information so that you can make better decisions. And there may be exceptions. You may say, I appreciate what it's telling me, but I'm gonna still do whatever in this particular area. And I'll look at those results separately, or I'm gonna challenge it and test it. And so it's really just it gives you a more powerful insight, information, and ability to, again, make better decisions. So I hope that was clear. And this is a pretty straightforward process that we go through for this. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily take very long. Most clients' data is not that complicated, and this is pretty repeatable and replicable. So I think that was basically it. Corey, Steve?
Yeah, great, Gary. Thank you very much for walking us through this. At this point, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. We had a few come in during the presentation, so I will read those out to our experts. If you have any other questions along the way, or as Steve and Gary start explaining some of this a little bit further, please feel free to type your questions in and submit them. So the first question that we received was, what's the minimum size for, what's the minimum size program for something like this? Yeah, I'll leave it to Gary or Steve, whoever wants to jump in and answer.
Steve, why don't you give your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think that, so there's a lot of variables that go into sort of evaluating the context of the scale, right? But I would say, there is obviously a cost to invest as it relates to developing the model and sort of maintaining it, the information associated with it, to apply it essentially to your segmentation activities. And so we generally would look at this as, from a scale standpoint, you would need to be sort of mailing in a typical, say, your average appeal size would probably need to be a minimum of around 30,000 donors. And we're assuming that if you have a fairly established program, that you're mailing that those 30,000 donors probably 10, 12 times a year at least. And so that would give us, as you start to look at what would cost you're investing in your appeal efforts and the amount of money you're raising, that would generally indicate that you're at a scale that probably makes a lot of sense for this type of investment.
Yeah, I would add, the benefit comes from obviously the change in what you're doing today, and so that change shows itself in kind of referred to as a swap set. A lot of times, there may be individuals that you're marketing, that you shouldn't, and there's individuals that you're not marketing that you should. Maybe that's not the case, but the need to at least have a change of about 20% of your volume for you to get if you're only affecting 10% of the volume, you're not going to see a whole lot of difference unless it's just really bad performing volume down there, but you're probably already not eliminating those. So but the more that we can affect, the more of the quantity that you have available that could be swapped in or out is where we have that. And as Steve, some of the numbers, I agree with what you were saying, Steve, is we need enough to be able to have easily in excess of 1,000 records to look at gift donations and and model on easily in excess of that. And so you extrapolate that up, it probably is, it's definitely in that range that you're talking about. So
great, thank you. Another question that came in, Gary, this one might be best suited for you. It says, walking through this stuff, it seems pretty straightforward, but what if we don't have anyone on our team who is quant savvy?
Right. I guess the first thing I would say is you do have somebody who, you have people who are quant savvy, but so I would push back and say, I think that it just may be that you're saying, oh, we don't have a data scientist or something. We don't have anybody who understands predictive modeling, but by virtue of you being, let's say, a marketer, you're definitely already understanding your performance metrics. And I think what we showed today, hopefully, was easy enough to understand that we're really just talking about better identification of who's likely to perform in this next campaign, better than what you'd choose otherwise. And so you can work with, an outside, there's lots of firms. The software today is so much easier. I would think initially it would make sense to work with an outside firm of some sort and to have them either do it for you or ideally kind of train you to some degree on how you can do this. And so, given that the bridge to doing this is just not that long, it's really just a matter of someone showing you, and you'd be surprised, I think, in how you can take, let's say, your Excel skills and suddenly, be doing much more sophisticated things than you ever thought you could do.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Last question that I've got, unless another one rolls in. How difficult is it to introduce something like this within an organization?
Steve, why don't you take that one too? Yeah.
It's actually not very difficult. Like any existing coding structure that's established through a source code, that already defines the segment that you're mailing, which is typically inclusive of an RFM identification. This just becomes another identification. And so essentially all that you're doing is just applying the tier that or however we've ultimately created this detail, but at the highest level, the tier, and that becomes the mechanism by which you're identifying the individual you're going to mail, and then you track that individual based on that code. So no different than what you're already doing today. It's just a different data point that's being used to identify the individual.
Yep. Yeah. What for our clients, another way of saying what Steve just said is, we'll get the donor file, we'll get updated gift history, and potentially promotion history if it's necessary information. We apply the scores that we've created to that file, put them in their appropriate segments, and now push back a file with member ID and the segments. And so now those segments, like Steve said, it's just a new way for you to do your selects.
Great. All right. Thank you. Gary, Steve, thank you guys so much for making time in your afternoon to talk. We're going to wrap up our webinar here and close things off. So, we are constantly refining this presentation, and we'd love to follow up with each of you to hear your thoughts on what you thought about the messaging and the presentation, as well as the concept itself. We'd also like to see if this is something that you'd be interested in exploring more for your organization. So we're actually going to be at the Bridge Conference in Washington, D.C. later this month. If you're there, we'd love to meet up and buy you a cup of coffee. In the meantime, though, if you'd like us to verify or to help you guys verify some of the thoroughness of your data and see what kind of robust data sets you guys are working with now, and to see how ripe for implementation something like this would be, we'd like to invite you guys to sign up for a free donor health report. So we'll send out a link for that shortly. No obligation, just wanted to share the information and let you guys take a good unbiased look at what it is that you're doing already and see how that measures up. So thank you guys again for your time in presenting and both attending as well. I will look forward to talking with you in the future, hopefully seeing you at Bridge. And here's to happy number crunching. Thank you guys. Take care.
Yeah, thanks everybody.